news. After several Russian drones slipped into Polish airspace, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk immediately called on NATO for consultations under Article 4 of the North Atlantic Treaty. And now, the alliance has deployed thousands of soldiers and fighter jets to the Russian border in what they are calling Operation Eastern Century. How far will the escalating tensions between Russia and its rival nations go? And above all, what will be the Kremlin's response? Before we dive in, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit like and subscribe button. It means a lot to us small creators. Thank you so much. NATO has now sent thousands of soldiers and fighter jets toward Russia's border. Poland has scrambled F-16 jets after Russian drones violated its airspace for the third time this week. Meanwhile, Dutch F-35s are patrolling alongside German Patriot missile systems, tracking every movement. NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte confirmed this clearly, stating, whether intentional or not, Russia's actions are reckless and extremely dangerous for civilians, including a mother and her infant, were killed when Russian drones struck an apartment building in Poland. And this isn't just about Poland anymore. France is also sending Rafale fighter jets to reinforce NATO's eastern border, while the United Kingdom is deploying Typhoon squadrons to Lithuania. The Netherlands has already dispatched a Patriot missile batteries to Warsaw, and Turkey is sending 10,000 soldiers with 3 Mi-17 helicopters to the Polish frontier. This NATO mobilization happened after Russia launched more than 80 drones at Ukraine in the largest strike since 2022. But some of those drones missed their targets in Ukraine and crossed into Poland, a NATO member state. NATO jets shot down 3 of them inside Polish airspace. This marks the first time in the alliance's history that NATO aircraft have used weapons against a threat inside a member's territory. 8 more drones crashed on Polish soil, damaging government buildings and residential areas. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk did not mince words. Warning: this is the closest Poland has come to open conflict since World War II. He invoked NATO's Article 4, a provision that triggers emergency consultations when a member faces a security threat. The last time this happened was when Syria attacked Turkey. But here's why this is different. Russia is establishing a pattern, something President Zelensky called pushing the Overton window. Each drone incursion tests how far NATO will allow Moscow to go before retaliating with force. The Kremlin denies everything, claiming their drones strayed due to electronic warfare interference. They even suggested they accidentally downed some of their own drones. But Western intelligence shows a different picture. This comes as Russia and Belarus begin massive military exercises right at NATO's border. 40,000 soldiers, 500 tanks, and 200 aircraft operating just miles away from Poland. Analyst Liana Fix from the Council on Foreign Relations warned if it's proven intentional, NATO must respond both militarily and diplomatically to prevent further incursions. Now, the alliance faces a huge dilemma. For years, NATO has been strengthening its eastern flank. Since Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, air patrols over Poland increased by 50%, and missile defense systems are now stationed in every major Polish city. But Russia is testing if that's enough. Consider the Wagner Group, the private mercenary force led by Ivan Prigozhin, which once marched toward Moscow after feeling betrayed by Putin's military leadership. Russian forces barely reacted, while civilians in Rostov-on-Don cheered for Wagner fighters and even gave them food. That was 2 years ago, when Moscow still believed it could win the war quickly. Now, more than 500,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or permanently wounded. They control just 18% of Ukraine, 1,000 square miles less than they held in March 2022. Russia has lost over 4,000 tanks and 18,000 armored vehicles for low-value borderlands with little strategic worth. According to anonymous Russian sources on Telegram, frustration is growing among generals ordered to fight meat grinder battles with almost no gains. As NATO strengthens its border defenses, it is also watching these internal cracks inside Russia. NATO's Secretary-General Mark Rutte sent a direct message to Putin: stop the war in Ukraine. Stop violating Allied airspace. Know that we are ready, vigilant, and will defend every inch of NATO territory. The stakes could not be higher. If Moscow's drone strikes continue, NATO will face a choice: respond cautiously and risk looking weak, or strike back hard and risk a wider war. Poland has already lost innocent civilians. How many more must die before NATO acts? Now, with thousands of Allied troops massing at Russia's border and no sign of Moscow pulling back, Europe is facing its most dangerous moment since the Cold War. What happens next will decide whether this remains a proxy conflict or spirals into something far worse. Meanwhile, Ukraine has once again struck Russia's Primorsk oil port on the Baltic coast. This is Ukraine's largest drone offensive to date, with dozens of drones launched deep into Russian territory. Governor Alexander Drosenko confirmed fires at vessels and pumping stations in Primorsk, a critical Baltic oil hub that handles 72 million tons of crude annually. It is Russia's primary energy gateway to Europe. Why is Primorsk so important to Russia's war machine? The port sits at the end of the Baltic pipeline system, where oil revenues directly fund Moscow's military operations. Every barrel passing through Primorsk brings in money for weapons, ammunition, and soldier salaries. Ukraine knows this, which is why it has spent months targeting Russia's oil infrastructure. Since January, Ukrainian drones have hit at least 10 Russian refineries, knocking out 17% of refining capacity over 1 million barrels per day. These are not random strikes but calculated attacks aimed at draining Russia's economy until it collapses. Russia claims it intercepted more than 50 drones, including 28 in the Leningrad region. But intercepted does not mean stopped. Debris from downed drones rained across towns near Primorsk, forcing authorities to suspend flights at St. Petersburg's Pulkovo airport. At the same time, Russia has intensified its own drone campaign on Ukrainian cities. Recently, Russian drones killed civilians in Kyiv and damaged government buildings. The contrast is clear. Ukraine targets military and industrial sites, while Russia strikes apartment blocks. Governor Drosenko downplayed the damage, insisting there was no oil spill and that fires were quickly contained. But he failed to mention how the disruption to Primorsk created major export scheduling problems. Tankers cannot wait indefinitely. Contracts, deadlines, and competition from other ports mean that every offline hour costs Russia millions in revenue and penalties, and the timing could not be worse for Moscow. Winter drives Europe's peak energy demand, a season that once filled Russia's coffers. But due to sanctions, Russian oil exports to Europe have already dropped 60%. Now Ukraine is making sure even what remains is not guaranteed. Why are these drone strikes so effective? A single drone may cost just $50,000, but the damage runs into the millions. Ukraine doesn't need to destroy entire facilities, just enough to force costly repairs and delays. And Russia's air defenses cannot stop everything. Despite interception claims, fires still rage at critical sites. In the Leningrad region alone, more than 30 drones breached Russian airspace. This isn't the first time Ukraine has targeted Baltic oil infrastructure either. Refineries in Bryansk, storage in Rostov, and pumping stations across western Russia have all been hit. Each strike forces Moscow to divert resources away from the front lines to defend facilities hundreds of miles inside Russia. The broader pattern is clear. Ukraine is shifting from defensive survival to economic warfare. Every refinery hit, every port shut down, every pipeline damaged weakens Russia's ability to sustain its war. Russian authorities are scrambling to control the narrative, boasting of quick responses and minimal damage. But locals report explosions lasting through the night, with smoke visible for miles. Drone strikes also hit Belgorod, Rostov, Tver, Pskov, Tula, and Kursk, stretching Russian defenses across thousands of miles. This kind of simultaneous assault is nearly impossible to fully intercept. One woman was killed in Belgorod in a separate strike, showing how the war is now penetrating deep into Russian territory. Regions once considered safe now face nightly alerts and evacuations. Russia may repair Primorsk in days, but Ukraine has shown it can strike anywhere, anytime. For ordinary Russians, these are not just distant explosions. They mean fuel shortages, rising prices, and growing doubts about the government's ability to protect critical infrastructure. If Ukraine can hit Primorsk, just miles from St. Petersburg, where will they strike next? The stakes are rising fast. Russia needs oil revenues to fund its war. Ukraine needs to cut those revenues to survive. Neither side is backing down, meaning the attacks are almost certain to intensify in the coming weeks.